Hi, everybody. Welcome to our How to Do Research and Get Published webinar on how to write and review registered reports. To get us started today, I'd like to introduce you to our presenters. First, Jessica Offenberger is a publishing editor on the STM Journal's editorial team. She manages a range of science and medicine journals, working with editors and societies to develop new strategies and problem solve. Jessica has a background in project management, marketing, business development, and self-publishing. Next, Dr. Kathy Manning is Associate Professor of Psychology at the University of Birmingham, UK, and is an editor of the journal Autism. Dr. Manning was an early adopter of open research practices in her field, leading to her receiving Autistica's inaugural Reproducible Autism Research Award in 2019. Dr. Manning contributed to the introduction of registered reports format at Research in Autism Spectrum Disorders and Autism, and has experience of registered reports as an editor, author, and reviewer. Next, Dr. David Sabara is an EOS Foundation Endowed Chair in Health Psychology and Professor of Psychology at the University of Arizona, where he directs the Laboratory for Social Connectedness and Health. His research focuses on understanding why close relationships are so important for health, as well as the psychological and biological consequences of ending relationships. David is the current editor-in-chief for the Association for Psychological Science journal, Advances in Methods and Practice in Psychological Science. David is a clinical psychologist by training, maintains a private psychotherapy practice in Tucson, and recently completed 10 years of service as Director of Clinical Training at the University of Arizona, where he teaches undergraduate and graduate courses. And last, my name is Sean Scarsbrick, a marketing manager on the author marketing team at Sage, and my primary role is to support authors and reviewers as they move through the publishing process with ease. And just a quick shout out, representing the Sage journals that Dr. Manning and Dr. Sabara represent, Autism and Advances in Methods and Practice in Psychological Science. If these may be good fits for you, we'd recommend looking at them to submit your manuscript or possibly signing up as a reviewer. Throughout today's call, please send us your questions using the Q&A chat at the bottom of your screen. We will get to as many questions as we possibly can, and for any questions we're unable to address live, we will follow up in a blog post. And just to get us situated today, the screen ahead of you shows a typical journey, a typical author journey, moving from the very early stages of securing funding all the way through promotion and publication. We have a plethora of webinars on different topics across this board, with lots to come next year as well. So if you're interested, please go back to watch any recordings or also catch us next year as we continue the series. And with this, I'm very happy to pass over to Jessica to get us started.
Thank you so much, Sean, for that introduction. So today, this is a brief overview of what we're going to be covering. So all things registered reports. Let's go ahead and dive in. To start us off, I wanted to focus on the results paradox by Chris Chambers. So if you click through, what part of a research study do you believe should be beyond your control as a scientist? The results. And which part of a research study do you believe is most important for advancing your career? The results. So going forward to the next slide, uh, pressure to publish can result in the following. Lack of replication, especially in psychology and neuroscience, where there are low rates of replication, um, boring, lacking in flair, what have you. Low statistical power. So if you invest in larger studies with more reliable data and it produces null results, it might not have the results you were hoping for to get published. Um, Sometimes there can be selective reporting or p-hacking, um, which is, for example, a selective report on analyses and outcomes that are statistically significant but don't report the negative or null results, which can be a distortion of the results. Harking is hypothesizing after the results are known, so either changing or retrofitting the results to suit the results. And publication bias, this is most serious in so many ways, where a lot of literature is dominated by positive results. So where do a lot of negative result publications go? Nowhere, usually, or they get converted into false positives by using some of the practices I just mentioned. Lack of data sharing, as this might expose researchers to some biases and practices that we've mentioned if that data is actually shared. And so this is where our conversation comes in today with registered reports, because results might become a dead currency in quality evaluation. So, what gives hypothesis testing as its scientific value is the question it asks and the quality of the method it uses, never the results it produces. We don't want to change the hypotheses and have a publication bias. So, the focus of today is that we don't want to touch the results, but we want to make sure that the results are amazing in whatever that might be, positive, null, or negative findings. So, without further ado, let's dive in. We'll have Kathy dive in to what registered reports actually are and get into that.
Thank you. Okay, so registered reports are a new publication format that aims to counteract some of those issues that Jessica's just told about. So they are manuscripts that are reviewed and approved in principle based on the quality of the introduction and methods before data collection and or analysis. So you might have heard before of pre-registration. So pre-registered reports are a type of pre-registration. And in this format, the manuscript writing and the peer review happens in two stages. There are different types of registered reports depending on what is being registered. So you might register planned data collection and analysis on new data that hasn't been collected yet, or you might have some existing data already and you want to register the planned analysis, which might happen if you were doing a secondary data analysis, for example. So in terms of these two stages, at stage one, editors and reviewers evaluate the study protocol, including the introduction, the methods, and the analysis plan before the research is conducted. And the decision to publish is made before the study is run and is based on the importance of the research question and the rigor of the methods. And then if that all goes well, the authors will receive an in-principle acceptance, which is a commitment from the journal that they will publish the study irrespective of what the results show. So after getting that in-principle acceptance, the researcher can then go ahead and complete their study, knowing that it will be published regardless of the results, as long as they follow their pre-registered protocol. And then following completion of the study, the authors will complete and submit their stage 2 manuscript, which includes the results and discussion sections, and then that will be sent for review again. The reviewers at that stage are checking whether the researcher has adhered to their stage 1 plans and also whether the conclusions reflect the data. And these stage 2 manuscripts will look much more like a regular research article format in that they'd have all the sections that you'd typically expect. Just want to flag as well that there are other types of pre-registration. So you can pre-register hypotheses and analysis plans on something like the Open Science Framework or aspredicted.org. And you can register clinical trials in a public trials repository. But registered reports are unique in that these pre-registrations are peer-reviewed, and also there is an assurance that the results will be published by a journal. Next slide, please. So why is it a good idea to do registered reports? Well, it helps to reduce researcher bias and fraud by discouraging authors from altering their analysis plans and their hypothesis after looking at the data. And we know that biomedical and social sciences research often suffers reproducibility issues, and this format can help to improve reproducibility by minimizing the questionable research practices that Jessica set out. It also allows for greater transparency within academic publishing. We're publishing all results, even if they're null or confirmatory. And this in turn advances the scientific record by providing results that may not have been published otherwise. So we therefore are not getting a scientific record that is biased by positive results. It's also good as reviewers and for editors because they can give feedback when it really matters. So this is kind of before the research has actually taken place. So it can therefore be quite rewarding to review as a reviewer because you can help the authors to shape their study at a critical time point before it is too late. It's also great as an author because it helps you kind of show that you're committed to open research practices, and it can increase the credibility of the researcher's work. And it's a good thing for journals and the discipline overall by showing a commitment to all types of scientific discovery and scholarly work. And these types of articles are viewed as just as important to the advancement of science as other publication formats. And more generally, it provides an example of how researchers are disseminating high quality research and are engaged with scholarship globally. And it shows a commitment to diversity and inclusion in publishing because these article types encourage submissions from a diverse range of authors from across all countries and backgrounds. Next slide, please. So I'm now going to take you through a flowchart for the registered reports publication process to explain the two-stage review process in a bit more detail. So it starts off with the authors writing a stage 1 manuscript, which includes just the introduction, the methods, proposed analyses, and any pilot data that they might have. As in any manuscript you submit, it will then go through editorial triage, where editors will make a judgment on the overall quality and the fit with the journal's scopes and aims. And the manuscript could be rejected at that stage if it doesn't fit with the journal's scope or if it's not kind of high enough in the methodological rigor. But assuming that's all good, it will progress to peer review, where reviewers will be invited. It is possible that the manuscript will be rejected on the basis of the reviewer comments, or quite likely that reviewers will have some suggestions for revisions. So authors can then decide to revise the manuscript, or they might decide not to revise the manuscript, at which point they would then withdraw their manuscript. But if they want to continue with the process, they will make edits to their stage 1 manuscript and submit a response to reviews. The editor may then send it back to review again, and the process may repeat. But once the reviewers and the editors are happy with the stage 1 manuscript, the editor will grant in principle acceptance. At that point, the author will be asked to put their stage 1 manuscripts with in principle acceptance in a repository like the Open Science Framework. Just to note that it can be kept under embargo at that stage if authors would prefer. And then the authors are free to conduct the study following the stage 1 plan. If authors decide to withdraw their paper after they've been given stage 1 in principle acceptance, they will be required to post a statement to explain why they have withdrawn their manuscript to ensure transparency. Next slide, please. Okay, so once the authors have conducted their study, they can then prepare their stage 2 manuscript. So really the stage 2 manuscript looks a lot like a typical research report, but because it also includes a full results and discussion section. So then reviewers will be invited to look at the stage 2 manuscript. Wherever possible, these will be the same as those who reviewed the stage 1 manuscript. So there's continuity and they can see, what's kind of how the manuscript has progressed. And the reviewers are asked to check that the stage 1 plans have been followed and that the conclusions made are sound. It's possible then that the authors will be asked to revise their manuscript again, but they cannot be asked to change what was already approved at stage 1. So they can't be asked to change their introduction or their analysis plan. The authors can still choose to withdraw their manuscript at that point, but I think this would be unlikely. and it would be hoped there wouldn't be too much back and forth before the full manuscript is accepted. The stage two manuscript can be rejected, but this would only be if the approved plan had not been followed or if the conclusions are not appropriate. So I think that's all from me. I'm handing back to Jessica.
Thank you so much. Um, Diving in a little bit deeper into the stage one and what is required. So the initial stage one submission should include these sections. It should include an introduction, a review of this introduction includes relevant theoretical and empirical literature that motivates the research question, and a full declaration, a full delineation and description of the hypotheses where this is appropriate. Please note that following the in-principle acceptance, the introduction section cannot be altered apart from correction of typographic errors and altering of the tense from future to present. So this is kind of what Kathy mentioned, is you should be leaving that stage one submission intact when you go to that stage two. So in the methods section, you'll have a full description of the proposed sample characteristics, including criteria for subject inclusion and exclusion, and a detailed description of procedures for defining outliers. Procedures of objectively defining exclusion criteria due to technical errors or for any other reasons must be documented, including details of how and under what conditions subjects would be replaced. A description of study procedures in sufficient detail to allow another researcher to repeat the methodology exactly without requiring further information is crucial. This is talking about that reproducibility or replication component. And then these procedures, this method must be adhered to exactly in the subsequent execution of the study, or any stage two manuscript may be rejected. If any deviations need to be made to the pre-registered methods, you'll want to consult the editor in advance. And just wanted to note that reviewers at stage one will be asked to specifically consider whether the stated study procedures contain sufficient detail to prevent undisclosed procedural flexibility, so like data transformations, aggregations, inclusion of covariates, and so forth. You'll also want to include a proposed analysis pipeline, including all pre-processing steps from raw data onwards, and a precise description of all planned analyses, including appropriate correction for multiple comparisons. Any covariates or regressors must be stated. Proposed analyses involving covariates must be specified and adhered to. Only pre-planned analyses can be reported in the main results section of the stage two submissions. However, unplanned post hoc analyses will be admissible in separate section of the results, which I'll dive into in a minute. You'll also want to include an interpretive plan, including specification of which outcomes will be interpreted as support or disconfirmation of the proposed hypotheses for each of the proposed analysis. In each case, authors should include a statement of what result would be taken as consistent with the prediction, what result would be taken as disconfirmation, and what result, if any, would be taken as inconclusive. So this is all important to outline in this section. Since publication bias overinflates published estimates of effect size, power analysis should be based on the lowest available or meaningful estimate of the effect size. In the case of highly uncertain effect sizes, a variable sample size and interim data analysis will be permissible, but with inspection points stated in advance, appropriate type 1 error correction employed, and a final stopping rule for data collection outline. You'll want to make sure full descriptions are provided of any outcome-neutral criteria that are required for successful testing of stated hypotheses. Such reality checks might include the absence of floor or ceiling effects or positive controls. Please note that reviewers will be asked to judge whether the manuscript includes sufficient specification of reality checks. So any description of prospective methods or analysis plans should be written in future tense. But as we said, you might need to modify here and there in stage 2 if there's any past or future tenses that need to be altered. The pilot data. So optional pilot data can be included to establish reality checks, effect size estimations, feasibility, or proof of principle. Any pilot experiments will be published with the final version of the manuscript and will be clearly distinguished from data obtained for the main experiment or experiments. With secondary registrations, many journals welcome submissions proposing secondary analyses of existing data sets, provided authors can supply sufficient evidence, for example, self-certification or a letter from an independent gatekeeper, to confirm that they have had no prior access to the data in question, nor to the summary reports of the data through descriptive or inferential statistics or narrative descriptions of the plan. Of data in the talks, papers, or personal communication with others. For the advice on the eligibility of specific scenarios, we encourage you to contact the journal editor. So going on to the next bit, we talked a little bit about what reviewers are looking for, but we want to make sure that whether you're submitting as an author and expecting reviewer feedback, or you're actually conducting a peer review of a registered report, what you should be looking for. So stage 1 submissions that are judged by the editorial board to be of sufficient quality and rigor are sent out for peer review. In considering papers at the registration stage, reviewers are asked to assess what is the main question being addressed in the study and how important is it to the field? Is everything clearly and transparently presented so it is clear what will be done? What are the key independent and dependent variables and how will they be measured? What are the author's hypotheses, if applicable? Whether the data can test the author's proposed hypotheses. Is there a coherent connection between the theory or hypotheses and methods and analyses? And if not, how can this be strengthened? How many and which conditions will participants or samples be assigned to? How many observations will be collected and what rule will be used to terminate data collection? What are the study inclusion criteria? What are the data exclusion criteria? What positive controls or quality checks are in place to provide a fair test of the stated hypotheses? Which analyses will be used to determine and examine the main question or hypothesis? For empirical registered reports, where possible, authors should submit the code or syntax they plan to run on the data. That way, the data analytical steps can be better traced by reviewers and errors can be spotted still. And then, are the authors proposing to collect new data or analyze existing data? This distinction is very important for transparency. Following stage 1 peer review, manuscripts will either be rejected outright, offered the opportunity to be revised, or accepted in principle. Manuscripts that pass peer review will be issued an in-principle acceptance or IPA, indicating that the article will be published pending successful completion of the study according to the exact methods and analytic procedures outlined, as well as indicating there is a defensible and evidence-bound interpretation of the results. Writing is coherent and clear, and the manuscript is formatted according to the journal author guidelines. I want to emphasize here that any deviation from the stated study procedures, regardless of how minor it might seem to you, the author, this could lead to rejection of the manuscripts. In the cases where the pre-registered protocol is altered after the in-principle acceptance due to unforeseen circumstances, you must contact the editor immediately for advice and prior to the completion of the data collection. This could be a change of equipment or unanticipated technical error, for instance. Minor changes to the protocol may be permitted according to editorial discretion. In such cases, the IPA would be preserved and the deviation reported in the stage 2 submission. If the authors wish to alter the study procedures more substantially following an IPA, but still wish to publish their article as a registered report, the manuscript must be withdrawn and resubmitted as a new Stage 1 submission. Note that registered analyses must be undertaken, but additional unregistered analyses can also be included in the final manuscript. And ultimately, this is up to the editor for final decision. So looking forward to withdrawal, what happens if you need to withdraw the registered report for any reason? It is possible, although very rare, that authors with an IPA may wish to withdraw their manuscript during or following the research. Possible reasons could include, but are not limited to, a major technical error, like I said, inability to complete the study due to unforeseen circumstances, or the author is declining to revise the Stage 2 manuscript as requested by the editor and peer reviewers. In all such cases, manuscripts can, of course, be withdrawn at the author's discretion. However, the journal will publicly record each withdrawal by marking the Stage 1 recommendation as withdrawn and including a statement in the Stage 1 recommendation explaining the key facts and the reason for withdrawal. If the recommended Stage 1 protocol was registered under a private embargo, then this will also be released in the protocol made public. Withdrawn manuscripts will also be hosted on the open repository where the study was pre-registered, as Kathy mentioned. Partial withdrawals are generally not possible. This could be with a regular registered report. Authors cannot publish part of a registered plan by selectively withdrawing one of the planned studies. Such cases must lead to a withdrawal of the entire paper. Should a Stage 1 in principle acceptance be forthcoming, authors will be asked to provide the journal with an estimated submission date for the completed Stage 2 manuscript. This deadline can be readily altered in consultation with the editor. For instance, there might be delays requiring additional time to complete the research. We know this happens. In the event that the authors fail to submit the Stage 2 manuscript within the designated number of months of the mutually agreed upon deadline, and then also it could be that authors might become non-responsive during this period to inquiries. And then there will be extensive conversations with the editorial team where we might need to consider that Stage 1 withdrawn. Going on to Stage 2. So Kathy started touching on this. Once a study is complete, authors prepare and resubmit their manuscript for full review with the following additions that we've outlined here. So the introduction and methods, apart from minor stylistic revisions, the introduction cannot be altered from the Stage 1 submission that was approved, and the stated hypotheses cannot be amended or appended. At Stage 2, any description of the rationale or proposed methodology that was written in future tense within the Stage 1 manuscript should be changed to past tense, and any textual changes to the introduction or methods must be clearly marked in the Stage 2 submission. Depending on the time frame of the data collection, any new relevant literature may have appeared between Stage 1 and Stage 2, and any such literature should be covered in the discussion section. So then with the results and the discussion section, these will be similar to standard original research reports, but with added requirements. The outcome of all registered analyses must be reported in the manuscript, except in rare instances where a registered and approved analysis is subsequently shown to be logically flawed or unfounded. In such cases, the authors, reviewers, and editors must agree that a collective error of judgment was made and that the analysis is inappropriate. In such cases, the analysis would still be mentioned in the methods, but omitted with justification from the results. It is reasonable that the authors may wish to include additional analysis that were not included in the registered submission. For instance, a new analytic approach might become available between the IPA and a full review, or a particularly interesting and unexpected finding may emerge. Such analyses are admissible but must be clearly justified in the text, appropriately caveated, and reported in a separate section of the results titled Exploratory Analyses. Authors should be careful not to base their conclusions entirely on the outcome of statistically significant post hoc analyses. The resubmission will ideally be considered by the same reviewers as in the stage one submission, but could be assessed by fresh reviewers. Um, so there was a question that came in the Q&A of how many peer reviewers typically review a manuscript. Best practice is two, but sometimes there could be more depending on the manuscript type, and this should be clearly outlined in the manuscript submission guidelines or somewhere on the journal website for transparency purposes. So at stage two, reviewers are asked to decide whether the introduction, rationale, and stated hypotheses are the same as the approved stage one submission. This is required. They also are asked to decide whether the authors adhered precisely to the registered experimental procedures. Where appropriate, they'll look at the floor and ceiling effects, positive controls, or quality checks, and make sure that those are reported. Failure to pass these conditions may lead to manuscript rejection. They'll also look if there were many and or serious deviations from the pre-registration. They'll look at how the findings impact the overall paper and conclusions. Where applicable, they'll look at whether any unregistered exploratory statistical analyses are justified, methodologically sound, and informative. They'll also look whether the author's conclusions are justified given the data. Please note that the editorial decisions will not be based on perceived importance, novelty, or conclusiveness of the results. This is what I talked about right at the beginning as we're trying to avoid that publication bias or changing the hypotheses to fit the results. And then they'll also be looking at whether the paper was written in a coherent and sound manner so as to clearly and efficiently communicate the research procedures and insights. Naturally and crucially, reviewers will be informed that editorial decisions will not be based on the perceived importance, novelty, or conclusiveness of the results. Thus, reviewers are free to enter comments on the record, sometimes that the influence of whether it's novel or important, they will not form a valid basis for editorial decisions. So thinking about what reviewers are looking for in the next slide, we've covered a lot of this on the previous discussion. This is just a written recap of what reviewers are looking for in stage two, so that when you're watching this recording later and going back saying, what do I need to look for when you're invited? This will give a nice, coherent, and comprehensive overview. To wrap up, I just wanted to cover some of the potential issues that could be faced with registered reports. So at stage two, reviewers might ask for changes to the introduction or methods. They might critique the novelty or importance. We don't want to see that happen. That should not be happening at the stage two phase. Any changes to the introduction or methodology section should be happening in stage one, and revision should be there. And that novelty and importance should not matter based on the results. There could be a long time between that stage one in principle acceptance and the stage two submissions, especially if the in principle acceptance was pre-data. So just keep in touch with the journal and the editorial team if you can't meet the expected turnaround times and deadlines, and just keep open communication to make sure that you're able to submit your stage two full manuscript. And then just being aware that if you are not in communication with the editorial team and that the time to submit your stage two manuscript, if it exceeds a year and you are not in communication, it doesn't get extended, it's possible that that resubmit option will close or it could be withdrawn. So just keep in communication if you need more time. We understand that there are circumstances that might come up. So with that, I know there's a ton of questions coming up, and I just want to pass it over to Dave and Kathy to share some of their tips working within the journal and just add into anything that I may have said.
Great. Thanks, Jessica. This was really exciting. And I think you and Kathy covered a lot of excellent ground, and it was super informative. I would like to just say that it's very nice to see everyone here from all over the world, and mention that I think it's very important that we have a wide range of representation from different parts of the majority world and global South. And that I think that's very important for the movement to disseminate open science practices globally. And so that's very exciting. And I also think everyone should congratulate themselves for coming, because a large majority of people in psychological science, at least that's our field, don't have a good sense of how registered reports operate. And I think everyone here today is going to have a much greater depth in their knowledge. I want to just talk about a few things in my time and just describe some of the observations that I'm seeing from our work at Advances in Methods and Practices in Psychological Science. It's AMPS is how we say it. So we publish a good number of registered reports, but our topic area for registered reports is largely methodological and statistical. We also publish registered replication reports, which are specialized types of registered reports seeking to replicate many findings in the field. And the registered replication reports take seminal findings and then try to evaluate them, reevaluate them in exact replications. And usually this involves many lab type studies. We usually combine 3 or more different labs working together in different geographical regions, trying to give us the best estimate of the effect size in question in larger, more adequately powered samples. So for people working in this area, I always think it makes a lot of sense to, as you first start learning about this, to ask yourself questions about the process and check some of your knowledge. We describe registered reports as results-free peer review. And this is the way it's talked about a lot in the literature in terms of the way reviewers look at papers. And I think that the talk perfectly outlines the kind of considerations for stage 1 and stage 2. Do you know the difference between stage 1 and stage 2? What's an IPA? What is the difference between a pre-registration and a registered report? Questioning yourself along these lines, I think, is quite helpful in determining where some of the gaps are and how you might want to approach figuring out the best course for your paper. One thing that I wish to mention is that, and this came up a little bit in the Q&A, is the implementation of registered reports varies by journal and by field. And so I don't know if Kathy would agree with this, but I think psychological science in general is quite a leader in initiating and driving this new style of scientific report, but the uptake and the implementation in other fields is rising. And a good place to learn about this is through a peer review service called Peer Community in PCI Registered Reports. The PCI Registered Reports reviews preprints of registered reports and then creates a system and an infrastructure for you then to either submit that directly to some journals that might even accept your stage 2 paper directly without further peer review, depending on their relationship with the PCI, or minimally, you get a peer review of your paper that you can then go on to other journals with. So it is a great resource in the field, peer community in registered reports, and you can check out the journals that are aligned with the PCI-RR, and you can also learn more about the process of RRs themselves. So there's probably a lot more I'll say when the discussion gets going, but I'll just leave it there for now.
Okay, thank you. And I just wanted to sort of talk a little bit about the context for why we introduced register reports at our journal, so Autism. So the adoption of open research practices has been quite slow in the autism field. And until a few years ago, there were no autism journals which accepted registered reports. But At Autism, our journal aims to publish work of direct and practical relevance to the quality of life of autistic people and their families. And so I think that increasing the credibility of research findings is really important for that aim, because we don't want to have practical applications that are based on a weak, distorted evidence base, because this may not improve autistic people's quality of life as we expect, and it could even lead to harm. And I think there's also something about how correcting methodological flaws before data collection and ensuring that the results are published regardless of what they show also means that we can reduce the chance of participants' time being wasted, which is particularly important when you're working with a population like autistic people. And just wanted to kind of give some kind of perspectives in terms of benefits as an author, because it can feel like extra steps, right? And it might not work for every type of research study, but I think there are also some clear benefits. So it takes away some of that uncertainty about the publication process. There's actually quite a high acceptance rate for registered reports. And it can also be really good as an early career researcher in particular to have on your CV a stage 1 paper that you know is probably going to get published, as opposed to the kind of more uncertain in preparation paper that has no guarantee of publication. And it also means that you don't have to carry that kind of worry about what will my results show? Can I get this published at the end? And also in the UK, reproducible research practices are a big part of our national research evaluation exercises. So that kind of determines how much funding we as universities get for doing research. So kind of doing registered reports kind of shows your commitment to those reproducible research practices as well. So that's all I wanted to share.
Great. Thank you very much. So we're going to move into the Q&A in just a moment, but before we do, while I'm pulling up my slides, I do ask everyone, keep sending your questions. We'll get to as many as we can. You see us typing away madly, and hopefully we'll be able to address as many as we can. Today is actually our last webinar for the year, but we've got a huge program scheduled for next year with lots of good stuff. So at the start of January, we have a webinar on how to support your students through the publication process. This would be a really nice fit for anybody who is a mentor, a professor, something like that. Later in the month, we have a webinar specifically on how to publish in sociology. And in mid-February, a webinar about interactions with publishing staff. So kind of an insider view of what to expect when you're submitting and publishing an article. We have at Sage a repository of information for authors on our Information for Authors hub, so you'll be able to find how to get published guidance and everything in between from the very start of your publication journey to the very end. I'll leave this on the screen for a moment just to say that we have an exclusive author newsletter, so feel free to sign up if you're interested. You'll get free academic publishing resources as well as a direct shot to see our upcoming webinars. And I want to end my slides right now with a quick plug for a contest we're offering at Sage. So if you've ever wondered whether your research is making a difference in policy, now is your chance to find out. In November, you can use Sage's Policy Profiles, our free browser-based tool, to discover the policy impact of your work, and you could win a $500 Amazon gift card. So entering the contest is very easy. If you scan the QR code on your screen, you go straight to a contest landing page. You can register for free, discover your most surprising citation, and submit your entry back by November 30th. And of course, terms and conditions apply. So if this is something you're interested in, please do by the end of the month. All right, so I think we're ready now to move into the Q&A. Lots of good questions are coming through. So please keep, as I said, please keep sending them. My first question is, how do I find journals that offer registered reports?
I think, I can start on this one. I think potentially the best way to start this is, what topic area am I working in that, so what are the universe of journals that would pursue the topic area that I'm working in? Let me just give you a very concrete example. We were interested in a research question around individual differences in adult attachment orientations. These are the characteristic ways people think and feel about their close relationship. So the association between attachment orientations and metrics of biological aging, methylation clocks, DNA methylation, age acceleration. So we start in the universe of health psychology, and we're interested in empirical journals that might be open to the possibility of registered reports. You can think in terms of field-wide journals, for example, psychological science certainly is, clinical psychological science certainly is. Some of the APA journals accept registered reports, and we found a good outlet at Biopsychosocial Medicine and Health, and the journal formerly known as Psychosomatic Medicine. So really important to read the authorship guidelines, the author guidelines or the submission guidelines of the journal, because basically says right there what types of papers they pursue. And then another place to look is journals that are at the peer community and registered reports. Journals may be listed as PCI friendly or interested. These are journals that also accept registered reports. It is a growing number of journals, but it is still, not the majority of journals.
And Dave, you already said this, looking at different repositories that might have these listed, and then just to emphasize, check the journal author guidelines. It will be clearly outlined there if a journal accepts registered reports. That's the best place to look.
I mean, since we're here, it's in general worth checking the author guidelines about nearly everything. And as an editor, I'm sure, Kathy, you feel this way, and Jessica, you've certainly seen this. We get a lot of submissions, and I'm often like, it doesn't seem that the submission, I mean, I guess if you submit to Autism Research Journal, you would think it would be on autism research. But like a lot of the papers that come to us, it doesn't seem like people are really looking closely at the journal, which is just good advice in general.
That's great advice. Good place to start for any publication, for any submission, excuse me. All right, another question that's come up a handful of times. How can I find the right fit for my research? People have been asking, is it possible for editors or journal boards to review an abstract before submission? Do you have any tips or any guidance on this?
I can start us out, and then I would love for Dave or Kathy if you have any insight. Um, so the best place to start is we have a great journal recommender tool that can provide some ideas on where to submit. We actually have a dedicated How to Do Researching and Publish webinar on how to select a journal, as there are many, many, many different factors that go into picking the right home for your research. And so we recommend watching that webinar. I'll have Sean send that in the follow-up. Some journals have the ability to review abstracts in advance. Usually, we recommend just contacting the editor. But again, not to sound like a broken record, the best place is to check the author guidelines first to see if it's even in scope. The manuscript submission guidelines will clearly outline the type of manuscripts, uh, both in terms of topics or disciplines that are relevant to the journal. So start there, and then usually you'll see a contact email in case there might be further questions. Kathy or Dave, as editors, I don't know if you have any other tips that you wanted to share.
People contact me all the time, and I try to provide some fast feedback on the abstracts and just sort of generally saying, well, do we think we would consider this or not? And we often, our journal and many journals have triaging processes in which we'll look at a paper carefully. We try to do that within a 2-week period to make a determination of whether or not we're going to send it out for review. But some editors don't really like to deal with because they can't because of the volume, but we have a small enough operation that I can look at things. So if in doubt, send something, and people can always decline looking at it.
Yes, that's a great shout to always reach out for help if you need it. Um, Another question, what distinguishes a registered report from a research article?
Can answer that if you like. Yeah, so I guess a stage two registered report at the end will look quite similar to a typical research article, but it's the difference in how it's written, the timeline, and how it's reviewed. So the stage one manuscript will more or less look like the first half of a research article, and then the stage two will look like the whole thing. It can look slightly different because so the stage one, you'll go into more detail about kind of what you would conclude based on different possible outcomes. And then when you're actually reporting the results, you're obviously then just telling about what the actual results are. So that's the slight difference. But otherwise, that's the kind of the main difference there.
Perfect. Thank you very much. Um, let's see. I've got a question here. Someone said, I'm a PhD student and want to work on a registered report submission. However, I'm not really sure what level of detail I should include. Do you have any good resources or any rules of thumb to follow here?
Oh,
Go ahead, Kathy. Yeah.
Yeah. So similar to the kind of last answer, I mean, the level of detail will be very similar to a typical research report. But something which is quite nice is that registered reports have always had the stage one manuscript published, sort of put available somewhere. So if you look at a accepted stage two registered report in one of our journals, you'll be able to find the stage one protocol and read that. So that will also hopefully give you an idea of kind of the level of detail. I guess one of the things that the detail that we really like in a stage one registered report is to really think through all the possible ways that your data could turn out and what conclusions you'd make under those situations. But otherwise, in terms of how much detail you put into the introduction and the methods, that will be very similar to a typical research report.
Kathy, can I ask a question for you about your experiences? One of the key issues for a registered report of even a secondary data analysis, but for new data is your sample size justification and your power analyses. What do you think the standards are in the field in terms of how people justify their sample sizes in a stage one paper?
So I think this is maybe where journals vary a little bit, because I think being an autism journal, for example, we realize that it can be hard to collect really large sample sizes. So if it's justified, like we think it's a really hard kind of type of data to get, and it's still valuable regardless, we might say sort of have a slightly lower level of expectation of what would be kind of acceptable power. Whereas I think other journals might have really clear kind of, particular power levels. And what we might do is we think that maybe that it might be underpowered. We might suggest some sort of statistical approach to kind of be able to pull that apart, like, for example, doing equivalence testing or Bayesian analyses to kind of understand whether it is the fact that there really isn't an effect here, or whether it might be that the data are just not sensitive to show a difference.
Right. Yeah, I think that's really good. I see quite a range too. I mean, from people writing to the end of the methods and the data analysis plan with all the details we've discussed, and people also simulating and creating synthetic data sets and writing all the way to the end of the results with the synthetic data, and really just putting in placeholders in yellow for the actual text they're going to change in the results. So this comes back to, again, it being a very journal specific consideration where people are looking for the information. And you'll see some of this go backward from the stage two report that you like, because that's the best way, I think. And, from a learning perspective, it's a really cool opportunity to see what everyone else is doing.
That's really helpful. Thank you so much. Really good question just popped through the chat, if I can pose it to you. What is the difference between a preprint and a registered report?
I can start us out if you'd like. So a preprint is a version of a scholarly manuscript before peer review and formal journal publication. So um, this a lot of times a preprint is the manuscript is already complete and it's been posted to a preprint server. Um, and then authors will typically update that record if and when the paper is later published in the journal. A registered report is a peer-reviewed article type where the study design, hypotheses, and analysis plan are reviewed before data collection or analyses begins. And that stage one, so just talking about the introduction, the hypotheses, the methods, is posted to that open repository. Um, so you might see a full manuscript in a stage one posted in an open repository or a preprint server. Um, a stage one can be a preprint, but not all preprints are registered reports. Dave or Kathy, is there anything you'd like to add or clarify?
No, that's a good explanation, I think.
You might see this is one of the ways I was mentioning of like a sort of test yourself at home kind of thing. You might see someone on social media post something and say, hey, my stage one manuscript received an IPA, and here's the post for the stage one manuscript, right? It's going to look like a proposal. It got an IPA in principle acceptance. Keep an eye out for this because it means if I go and do what I said I was going to do, the journal is going to publish it stage two down the road. And that sort of relates to preprints in terms of how people are trying to do science communication. So for example, a few weeks ago, we accepted a stage two paper on a registered replication report related to a social psychology phenomenon. And I asked the authors to send me their preprint so I could circulate the preprint for commentary before AMPS and Sage posted the actual full article. So they send us a PDF of the document, and it's the final accepted version. It's not the copyrighted version that Sage and AMPS own. I'm not sure I know all the details of that, but they post the copyright, they post the final accepted version, and that's a preprint too. So that ecosystem is very interesting for science communication, but they are different things.
Thank you very much. I think with that, it is time for us to wrap up today's webinar. I want to thank everybody for joining us today. We've had a very active Q&A, and I really appreciate everybody sending all of your questions. A huge thank you to our speakers, to Jessica, to Dr. Manning, to Dr. Sabara, and thank you to everybody for joining. So I hope to see you in a webinar in 2026, but in the meantime, please take care. Thank you.
Thank you. Bye, everyone.
Bye, everyone.